Hello everyone. Since today I'm too lazy to talk about von Clausewitz, there is a hefty chapter that is obviously always very fascinating, but I didn't have the time to prepare it adequately. I thought to go with a free theme and addressing a question that I think is very important for a channel that essentially discusses history. As you know, I have never come to you and said, look at me because I'm a competent authority and this qualitative content you must listen to because it's important. Of course, I emphasize the importance of history per se, and I try to present Schwerpunkt in a somewhat of presentable light, aside from all the technical faults and my poor linguistical skills and etc. But I think it's important to to talk a bit about how is Schwerpunkt reliable. That is, at this point, views and especially watch time is increasing on Schwerpunkt. I see it. It's a structural process. It was normal to happen. The followers are increasing, and definitely there is a greater interaction. Even you see it with the comments, with the general participation to the channel, and obviously this makes me relative moderately happy. Never happy in life, and we should never be fully happy in life, because what is full happiness anyway? But of course, I thank you. Jokes aside, for this, that I care very much about your you're fealty in the measure I see you coming back here, with regularly and following it and being interested in my topics. And obviously, this brings to an important question, that is, how reliable I am, how correct, how accurate, how precise my historical content is, right? Given that I base the channel fundamentally on it. And this is a particularly thorny question for every historian, because we all know that essentially nobody has truth in his or her own pocket, and we essentially all rely, gnoseologically, but also in terms of communication and dialogue, which are actually two very different things, after all, on a base of approximations, right? We are never fully precise. We are never certain fundamentally about what we're talking about. But definitely there is a good enough that works for human interaction and civilization building, and that we all differ with, right? That Schwerpunkt objectively differs in many ways from other YouTube channels. I've never found probably the channel gets closer to mine as a philosophy, as I've seen is Thucydides, the historian, that I never followed, but I've seen enough of its content to to say that's a guy who's doing something very similar to me, albeit in a different way. We all have different worldviews, topics choice, and in general. Yet it seems to me that there is not much of this way of making videos out there. YouTube has changed as a platform over the years. I arrived, this channel is basically two years and a half old, and I started, uploading regularly, really, since 2 years. And so this is a recent enterprise, and I've had, my very modest fortune, I must say, because of course I've put a lot out here, and I haven't had the mass response that I hoped. I was essentially testing YouTube for, and yet the thing is expanding. I've never sponsored Schwerpunkt, as you know. Everything I do here is for free. I could put advertisement after the 1,000 subscriber. I am at almost 2,000, and it doesn't seem to me necessary. You know that I do this essentially for a matter of personal interest, and I must say I enjoy this. It's a way to stabilize my psyche, in a way, my daily routine. I know that nothing serious. Fortunately, I don't have much of problems at this point. yet, environmental factors could interfere, even with the Schwerpunkt's production, in the sense that unfortunately I have very, worrying problems that I could have with noises around, and this is maybe, something I should take care of, but let's hope that for now we'll be able to continue this as long as we can. But in general, I want to continue this, right? My only fear is that, the channel will be taken down at some point. I'm saving all my videos, and but these are technical information you're not fundamentally interested in. But I must say that, the response has been positive in the measure I see that at least the contents I put out are somewhat new, especially for the topics choice and also the way they are approached, generally speaking. That is not just to tell the story, and as you understand, not even caring about, the tale is delivered properly, even just from a linguistical point of view, or that I essentially don't even sketch my videos. So I have naturally certain texts or references, and I make this collage before each video, but it takes me 1 day to prepare it. 1 day, literally 2 hours, 2-3 hours, not more. And I work the rest of the time still with my research and other stuff. So it's all a bit part of a system now, a dynamic that is synergic in my daily activity. The point, though, it's become such a habit at this point. I've been making lots of videos now uninterruptedly, because also coronavirus has brought an end to my travels, to my vacations. And I've never abandoned you in this regard, but I've done it some other time. And it seems to me I forget the point here. That is, of course, I am doing this freely. I don't really owe anything to anyone, because I'm doing this for free. But at the same time, I care about the fact that what I put out here is, accurate enough. And I use the term accurate, not necessarily correct or precise, because probably what we're searching for here is getting the point right, or better, the direction of the point right, which is already, fairly difficult, especially when you talk about large, let's say, manualistic topics that can be about enormous issues from a political, social, military point of view, and that naturally required that degree of approximation I was talking to you about before. So I must tell you that from my perspective, every time I talk in here, I feel guilty in a way, right? Every single word I use doesn't satisfy me. Like, I know I could do much better. I know I could, put much greater effort just in the research, and in the, in the care of the quantity, even of the data. I could present this in a much more, let's say, accessible way, right? I know that hours of of explanations for a single video is tough, right? And I know that. I've always known that, and I don't pretend it, right? From a certain point of view, the more, for example, there are people say, this could be shorter, yes, or you should fragment it, but yeah, I could do a lot of things, right? I don't know whether I should though, because still what I care about is to express myself in the way that I deem to be more, not more effective for people's tastes out there. Because of course, as we were saying before, I'm glad to receive views that people listen, that I can be of some help, that people, mainly because people are interested in history, and that's something that really makes me appreciate more what I do. So I don't care if you listen to me as a person, that I don't talk much about myself, that I know that you fundamentally do not care, and that's fine. That's how it should stay. And yet I understand that what I say out here has potentially some sort of impact, that at this point seems to be, moderate, so I don't really care. But it's obvious that the more people start following me, and the more I feel the pressure of the responsibility of saying things that are historically correct, rather than just being accurate in a way, right? And the question is, if I listen to Schwerpunkt, how correct this is, right? Because it happens every once in a while. Someone stumbles, especially in Facebook groups where I post stuff just for getting it in circle at some point, and there is the good-willed actually, and probably even good-hearted random passerby that says, but with these videos, maybe I don't know, they look pretty much homemade and without much care for the form, etc. And the first attitude is obviously, and I can say that because it's the same thing I feel most of the times I come across some content in general that is not merely entertainmental, but informative. That is, this guy's a fraud, right? What is he talking about? He's probably making this point, but he doesn't know what he's saying. That's normal actually. That happens all the time. There's the first impact with users can be conflictual, right? It happens, in friendships that start with with a contrast of some sort at the beginning. Then you speak your mind, you clarify the thing, and you start appreciating the person, and you even begin to follow. There are people who follow me just and kind of to tell me like you suck, but you keep following me. So what's the deal? It happens actually very rarely. The overwhelming majority of the comments again are very positive, very appreciated, and if anything, I get some technical tip like higher the volume or buy another microphone, etc. But not much to say from the strictly historical point of view. And I think this is interesting because it reflects that, of course, I know, and this is what I will try to explain today, that what I put out here is something historically meaniful in a way, right? Not properly anything special, but still something that is properly historical, if anything by method, because as I was saying before, I don't just present a tale or a story. I like very much in English what we don't have in other languages, not even my own. This is the distinction between history and story, right? And that is actually quite important, because history, unfortunately, even in the English-speaking world, but elsewhere, more for this semantic reason that we have explained. I think most people out there, even those who are passionate about history, amateurs or even more, that rarely stop on the meaning of history unless they actually undergo true research from historical point of view themselves, right? The activity of research, that just know it just as a dictionary, as a vocabulary note on Schwerpunkt. That is, when I talk about history, I don't talk about the idea of a story in the past, right? As most popular culture is more familiar with history, and the meaning is properly the research, right? And then we all use this, what we would call narrative, fundamentally. That is fundamental to explain anything. Like, we all have a narrative, and there are certain words that have acquired in popular usage kind of a negative semantic character, because what we express the word narrative, we somewhat assume that there is an agenda behind that. And even in that, there is an agenda, but what's that agenda about, right? Because I have an agenda of, once again, kind of making disclosure in history, right? I have probably my own subjective reasons for that. I have my own bias that I sometimes don't like. If I say, I usually, if you follow regularly my content, that if I have an opinion that is personal, that is more like a personal judgment rather than probably an historical datum, I say it, right? I say, according to me, this is because, but it's not necessarily the case. But going dipping in this matters is difficult, because naturally we should make a lot of philosophy of history to come to the point of what this whole thing works like. We should enter in other fields of sociology or politology to really express what's the use of history in our world and how it's changing. And I can tell you that I've learned an astonishing lot of stuff from YouTube in this regard, that after all is a pretty narrow let's say better, that has a pretty narrow space dedicated to history in it, right? Most of the true history, even here meant just as historical context, not the methodological type I was talking about before, exposition that I was talking about before, is pretty small, right? There is not much content about history published out here. Right, there is a bit this specialization now from certain specific, from certain channels that evidently have a team behind, and that point on that there are the most successful channels, those who get the millions views, etc. That evidently use some of the best, contents that, however, are often very, very concise in the measure of not saying, like compressing, I don't know, typical Schwerpunkt script or speech, let's say better at this point, because the script does not exist, and compressing it, eliminating the all this stuff and the linguistical mistakes, and presenting the same amount, but probably it's concise in the sense that it's usually at a much more reduced level of depth, right? I recently met a guy who said, about the video I made on the Battle of Buvine that was on Facebook, was saying, look, nice battle. Well, yeah, you don't present Battle of Buvine like saying nice battle, like it's the single most important battle in the Western Middle Ages, and I made more than 2 hours of tactical description, but like it's a pretty specific and precise and big deal after all, because aside from the quality of the video or even of the content, fine, in fact, that's the point I was making. Someone out there that made basically the same thing, which is not there, and it's easy to search for that, and the point is, presenting me one of these other videos that lasts, I don't know, like 10 minutes and explains to you the Battle of Buvine in 5 minutes of actually strategical background, 5 minutes of more or less tactical deployment and combat, and pretending that in 10 minutes you can't really tell the story. And yeah, you can tell the story, but it's a much more superficial one. That is, no doubt, to me, it's very correct. Surely there's not going to be much of a mistake behind. But what are we talking about exactly here, right? Because if you tell me, as it was the case, like this content is much more accessible, and yeah, sure, that is to say, even an article about, let's say, a serious article, and let's not say a Wikipedia article just to sound pretentious, because Wikipedia on its own even has its good content, telling the truth. But let's say an article from Academia Edu, right? It's very accessible. It's like 15 pages. You can read it. Everybody can read it. A university class is somewhat less accessible, right? The work for a thesis is even less accessible. Degrees are even less accessible, right? Academic titles are even less accessible. What does this mean exactly? That those are, let's say, less important things, because this platform should be just about what exactly, right? Because if I wanted to know more about Battle of Buvine in that regard, I wouldn't even go on YouTube to watch something that lasts 10 minutes. I would simply go literally on Wikipedia. At that point, you learn more, definitely, easily, and much more, poignantly in many ways, schematically. And so what's the deal? I know that YouTube is transforming, in philosophically speaking, into something more entertainmental, and certain categories of friendly, like family friendly. At this point, I don't know, even it's more about that, frankly. But still something that is always more pre-packed, always pre-confectioned, and much more strategically directed to that specific kind of consumer that, however, wants seemingly an ever cheaper product, right? And I'm fine with that, because if the market it functions like that, this is not a problem of maybe YouTube marches a bit on it and tries to and there are all these conspiracy theories. The governments want us to be ever dumber. I don't know. Maybe it's true. Maybe it's not. I don't know. It's surely, dumber people are easier to frame, to exploit in many ways. But I don't bring it to that point. I was still at the point where YouTube was about broadcasting yourself. It's something I never liked at all as a definition, frankly, because I don't like to broadcast myself. I hate exhibitionism, as I rarely hate something. So the point to me was just, an average person speaking his mind out here and, seeing if someone's interested for some kind of collective purpose, like to say, okay, let's spread history. And I received messages from very few people that, however, were devastatingly moving in many ways, because they told me things, as I told you in other occasions, like, I thanks to you, I started a university path. And wow, I mean, am I responsible for that? Of course, not entirely, because, I doubt that I was the decisive factor there, but, just the fact that someone writes me to tell me this, I mean, it's very touching in many ways. Not that I care deeply at the end of the day. I care about a lot of other things. I'm very somewhat individualistic-minded person, but I'm of course glad about that for what it means, right? For what it's supposed to mean, and the idea of having this mean now of simply talking for hours about historical stuff and letting other people listen. To me, it's freaking amazing. Like, it's about messaging. Even this can be observed as a trend even in many other fields. Like, think about, 30 years ago, most people would just phone and send letters to each other. Today we can't, it took time, and today we can literally communicate with everybody from the other side of the globe for free, instantly, and nobody seems to give a damn much more. Right? It's as if there was even an enclosing within ourselves at certain levels in this very sectorial and I don't know even how to define this, but narrow-minded basis. I don't know why, right? It's probably being scared about the difficulty of understanding the complexity of the world. But this is exactly the point, that if you're acknowledging at this point that there is a world out there, chances are, because the world has grown, it is more dynamic, it's and greater, it's a more important system to decipher for you, because your life is influenced by that. And if your reaction is enclosing within yourself or within your boundaries, etc., it's really not a good strategy. It's how, historically speaking, cultures failed or civilizations crumbled, right? Because that means a failure properly, even of trying to understand certain thing out. So the difference between a content that could be hours long, just imagine if people had been told just even 10 years ago, 20 years ago, you could have it for free, a description of Battle Bovine like I made before. You might have had this liked or disliked, but 2 hours and a half of consistently historically based, source based, right, historical content proper, people would have been like, wow, I want to treasure that, I want to record that, I want to save it. Today nobody gives a damn, and once again, I don't care. I'm fine with that. I'm not searching for like millions of views, but the point is, why is there the search for something simpler, where that simpler corresponds to literally, first of all, that if you need to watch that, it's because you don't even know particularly much about what that content is really about. It may be a starting point, and it's fine. But the question is how much beyond the average person goes, even just thanks to that video, compared to one that tells you, look, maybe there is something to say more than like 5 minutes about the world battle, right, about world combat, that maybe there is something within it that we should understand, that is the minds of those people, or the organizations of those armies, or why they work in that way, and why they were there in the first place, what motivated them, what brought the clash to go in a certain way, which tactics were employed. This is all something you can sketch in a few minutes if you really want to expose that the thing existed. But in order to explain it, it takes a bit more time, because once again, what is more accessible? Let's say a 15 minutes videos on YouTube, or a university class on a certain topic, right? I personally have had my own share of, talk in front of audience, even at university, not much, and I managed to crack a joke here and there, to make my contents more appealable. But generally speaking, I think the talking here has helped me to realize also what is that, not people would like to hear, but what they would be amazed to hear if they only knew the thing was there. Things that are maybe not amazing in the sense that, once you know them and you have reflect upon it, they seem pretty normal. Like they can seem pretty normal to me, like an average person, as many of my followers already, right? I see that many of you are actually historically competent, that you know what I'm talking about, that we more or less share the same ideas, and that we any interests, and we know about the dimension of history, if anything, just in a basic way, right? As I tell you, I have my own field of expertise, but then, aside from the fact we never quite discuss it in Schwerpunkt, I talk about all but it, fundamentally speaking. Yes, I do study medieval history, I do study military history specifically, but I'm not expert on, I don't know, what's the last video I made about what? I mean, something that, I don't know, Viking warfare. I never fully, truly studied, I never prepared an exam, right, on Viking warfare. I've read my own share stuff, and I try to put out there what a historiography, in fact, told me about it, and based on sources, and often going to check sources, because at that point, if you know the source is accessible, you have both the historiography and the source accessible, go check both, right? Because it actually amazes you how historiography can be superficial, or distorting in many ways, and trying to even create this exoteric this mirage that for which history is something so difficult that takes so much so much competence to understand. Today I was still I just watched videos from a lady from one of Facebook's. I watch just videos that are from universities or from museum curators, so that I know that I'm sure that the content is reliable. Yes, because I don't tell you what's my background. Many of you already know that, but do you think that, I don't know, museum curators are actually particularly competent people in general, or did even professors are? Like, what's your standard of security? You're sure about that everything they say is actually good? Or even if you find, I don't know, university classes online, you think that's literally all you can find? There is not much of those contents out there. I mean, there is much for a general audience to listen about history, which whatever did it's past in these videos, but not much of a more structured and specialized review. This is what I'm trying to do instead, and I personally think we should give a shot also to people that are frankly not certificately competent, right? Because I could tell you, hopefully in some month, that I have my titles to even teach at university, but I will never use them to say, look, I have this title, therefore I have this power, I have this authority, and you should be listening to me because I'm I just speak the thing. Here we will enter in something deeper, that is, what's the relation with historiography and sources, how I use them, and etc. But the question is, everybody should listening to contents not because there is the authority that presents it to you, so that you bow to it and you listen to it and you're sure that that's correct, because many times even the greatest authorities are actually wrong, right? Mostly they're not. On average, they're not. And surely for the average person, like it's healthy to listen from authorities and from hierarchies. But there are also certain problems of interpretation and of general background of history that, speaking from the interior, from behind the barrier, I can tell you is really much more controversial and for this very reason fascinating than it seems. And it's sure, I would never be sure that anybody who speaks to me is actually telling me something reliable, right? I would like to understand it myself, because otherwise you have a fideistic approach to it, and that's why I privilege the properly historical content, because the historical content shows you, how you got to the point, right? Not just, telling you the story, right? The tale, and then you buying that because you presume that someone is competent for speaking it, right? I try. This is my main, philosophical, methodological, and point in the story, trying to explain things for even how I see them, and I can be wrong, as as we started immediately by saying, because guess what, everybody can be wrong easily, right? And I even make mistakes. I usually correct myself if they happen immediately. Sometimes it happens a distance of months. All of a sudden I say, oh my god, in that video I said that thing, it was wrong, right? They will never know, because they can't find. No, you can't. I'm sure you can find the spell mistakes. You often do it. It's easy. Yesterday, for example, what did I say that I remember about the 100 Years' War? I said the Battle of Châtillon. Instead, it was the Battle of Castillon, because it's two different things. But this is a mispronunciation, for example, that will not kill, hopefully, the whole 2 hours, 1 hour and a half, whatever it was that I produced. But there is, in fact, there are many layers, there are many levels, many circles, right? I like to see the world as divided in this regard by many circles, right? That are very steep usually, because I presume, at least I have experienced for myself, that knowledge and understanding and let's say reason in many ways proceeds by degrees. Like, it's never usually like a fully gradual thing, like it simply increases. No, it's like there are various steps in a ladder that, until you don't get to the next step, you will always remain under, and you will not be able to fully see in perspective the whole ladder from the top. And that's actually the single most important thing, and fun and interesting and beautiful thing about history, that it is able to get that perspective that amazes you when you get there, because you're and it's even a negative, enlightenment, because you realize that the point is not that you learned something new, positively speaking, but you simply realize what you could sort out by yourself, but you were too ignorant or dumb or both to understand by yourself. And this is why we have sources, and why we have historiography, and why the historical path is is expanding. Like as we often said, modern historiography has done a terrific job in the last, even in the last decades, for example, for sure. But in the last 100 years, there is no doubt that we have reached certain levels of methodological refinement that are amazing, right? And of course, this presents new challenges, because the more we write, the more it's difficult to frame all what we know. So lots of things are gonna change, also in the way we learn and teach history in the future. My greatest nightmare, but which I hope will not quite happen in the same way, is that history will be immediately totable, let's say, by just inserting a chip in your brain. You don't have to study a lifetime to achieve that. But it actually doesn't work. Many people say, but it's, if you have your smartphone in your hand, it's as if you had an extension already of this kind of your body, artificially speaking. You have all the knowledge in there. Yes, unfortunately, that is pretty useful. I have nothing against technology by itself. I think, I'm actually pretty lucky to be writing, 1,000 pages of work in the digital era, because otherwise it would have been, like a torture just, 30 years ago. But the point I was making is that, that oddly enough, as we were saying before, it doesn't seem that the availability of knowledge corresponds now to people getting particularly interested in knowledge. Right, people have spit blood for millennia in civilization to get in the place of being able to get an education. Today we all can, overwhelmingly so, because we have never had so much sheer by scholarly speaking, such an enormity of knowledge at our disposal for free, right? Just a click away. Doesn't matter who you are. And nobody gives a damn about it. Of course, there is not just knowledge, but I presume human civilization is going to expand mostly in a direction where we will be needing more thinkers than doers. Paradoxically, I mean, this is already the case, right? Compared to the beginning of the 20th century, the tides have reversed. Like today, the majority of population, at least I presume in the Western world, is more theoretically than practically oriented. Right? 100 years before, it wasn't like that. People reasoned in a very different way. It was nor better nor worse, but it was simply, adapted to the circumstances, and so we are today. Passing to the certification of my content, like first of all, how should you take the whole thing? So, as you know, I do this as a sort of hobby at this point, and I do it because I have enough time for it, because it helps me, as I told you before, to just to stabilize certain things, to give me a timeline to do, to have a schedule, to be there in some way, to have some points of reference even in the organization of my work. It helps me learning a lot by itself, right? Don't ever think, for example, like that you just having a degree is enough for your life to be a historian. Like, what I've learned for making Schwerpunkt is quite big compared to even what I studied at university for years. And the point here is that, of course, I might have written a master degree back in the day, but not really having known so much beyond that if I had made a research to make these videos. And here I will not start digressing on the fact that the importance of the generalistic approach over the specialistic one. It is a wholly different issue we have discussed elsewhere if you go in the Terrain playlist, you will find plenty of this rambles. But today it's the relation with the source and the historiography for the videos I make. So how does this work? Well, as you know, I chose these topics randomly, but within a pool of already pretty practically and concise information that gets to the point, right? It's not just the usual speech. There are particular types of works. Some are heterogeneous, some are more discursive, some are more, let's say, precise, some are even wargamistic. There is a legitimate branch of serious historical production that is drawn from a wargamistic background that, as you know, I don't like particularly much for the general, categorizing nature of tendency, let's say, better of these things, and to make things too concise, actually. But if that becomes as having a point of reference, for lots of poignant and direct and evident and first-hand, information from the sources, that can be useful. Then there are other contents that are manualistic fundamentally, and that I use because theoretically Schwerpunkt is about making this plateau of manualistic stuffs to at least say get the base, for the foundation for what we will have theoretically to build upon it in a more specific and a diversified way. Actually, since last year I began to make this kind of more specialized stuff. I can say specialistic, but starting to say things, I don't know, let's study today Viking standard bearers and symbolism and everything we can attach, and that's the point. That's where you will rarely find actually a historical video on YouTube that even deals with this categorizing way. At the beginning I thought Schwerpunkt could be as a sort of encyclopedia in this regard, where you have all these lots of tailored together videos that start to become like this, like a net, because now I made several videos about even the same topic or that are interrelated, and I hope to continue in that regard, because it properly gives a structure and it answers a lot of questions even about how competent Schwerpunkt is. Many videos that are produced in that more multimillionaire fashion, multimillionaire views fashion, let's say, with even a certain budget evenly behind it, are often oriented to, either they can be part of series usually, but it seems to be they're more strategically designed to say, okay, what would like these people to know in terms of this single video's topic, right? And let's do something cool that people like. I don't know, the Templars, or I don't know, the Roman legions and stuff like that. And that's easy because you can see how this is very fascinating historically speaking, just to look at YouTube and see how popular culture produces these these interactions, and you can understand so much, right? Really about the same tastes of people. The other type of I hadn't stopped to make the list of type of channels that are out there. Unfortunately, and there is also why the narrative seems to be a serious thing, that there are lots of channels talk about history that, however, very very obscure in some ways. That is, either they are politically oriented, but let's leave this aside because essentially what they are doing. But there is a lot of conspiratorial out there. This was, I guess, more common back in the day, or it's simply because the YouTube algorithm, after all, doesn't sponsorize these videos more than much, fortunately, because of course we would like to listen to that. About things, I don't know, the reptilian Merovingian conspiracy, that's embarrassing, because sometimes the name of the Franks or the Merovingians is kind of more associated to that kind of delirium that to an actual historical interest. And I can say that I'm first one that made an actual long video about the Merovingians on YouTube. This is quite fascinating. But aside from this, I presume one of the interesting aspects of how I addressed this historical topics over time is that I realized how easily, given that I have objectively a lot of books, and when I say a lot, believe me, they are a lot, right? It's not like a just self-promotion. It's when you rise above the 10,000, you start realizing. Of course, I've never read them all, and I will not leave enough to read them all. But in terms of accessibility, given that most of them are actually in digital, that's terrific, because I can get so much information at once about different topics, and crossing it, and being somewhat more putting some more on the table, simply. And this has helped me a lot. It happens even with other forms of contents, like with maps, etc. I started collecting, treasuring them, etc., and so on. The point of how accurate this is more controversial. So first of all, in order to be truly competent about whatever topic you're talking about, you should really have written a PhD on it, right? That is fundamentally the best thing you can have done in your entire life regarding to a single topic. There are PhDs that are garbage, telling the truth, but still, if you have done it properly in the measure of, at least repeating what other people have said and trying to expand, I mean all the other people that you can't ever know, and expand a little on them. That's fundamentally the goal of saying, you are the greatest authority on that single topic that exists out there. The question is, we don't have all a PhD on every single historical topic, and it's already quite hard to get to the to just having one, and it's fundamentally impossible to be that kind of expert on everything. You can't be expert on everything, right? Let's be completely honest in here. I know there are a lot, especially of young people, that think that because they haven't experienced the whole path, after all, that just for stating these things or making what has brought me in this case specifically in years to at least to talk about this stuff, to reason about it, who knows what kind of stuff this person knows. This must be such a great. Doesn't happen, fortunately, with the elderly and with the mature people. But there is still this kind of saying, look at this person, what it's saying, what it's not saying. I really want to know, I really want to extrapolate the information, the juice of this knowledge, of the sap of intelligence, or whatever it is. This doesn't, apply necessarily on me. It's really a matter of an attitude that is widespread, and actually young people are meant to function a bit like that, because you have to start from something, and definitely you have to start, whether it's a professor, whether it's a book or a YouTuber, from somewhere, right? I started from groups back in the day mostly, and books at the same time, and of course professors and so on. It's a mix usually, but in popular culture, of course, platforms like YouTube and the internet in general provide this kind of contents that are, in fact, somewhat more accessible, but also perplex maybe in the quality of the research and of the work out there. There is so much like history, and here we're just talking about historical contents. But I don't know, there are lots, for example, of science-based videos that are pretending to make a history sometimes of certain particular phenomenon. They get it completely wrong. So don't ever think that there is like a pool of knowledge and of intelligence, of rationality, and that knowledge fundamentally emanates from that in its purest form, just because someone that history is misused, raped, misconceived, abused in a way that it's utterly disgusting, especially at this point. This is part of a broader political and social dynamic in the world. More people now that before couldn't even read or write are, have their own space of expression. Therefore they overcrowd sometimes the world in a way that the space of communication, let's put it in this way, in a way they you can't hear the voices that actually matter sometimes in terms of competence, because let's be honest about it, we have been grown in a world where we were told that we are so important, we are all so special, but we all have our opinion matters, right? Frankly not. Like the overwhelming majority of the people do not seem to be special at all, do not seem to be competent at all, do not seem to be even intelligent at all, to tell honestly. Not because I presume to be, more or less intelligent than others, but it's those famous standards of approximations of the good enough that we should be, that are basically lower standards. In terms of lower standards, right? I'm not even being demanding here. Yeah, most people are pretty freaking dumb, right? And this, however, doesn't mean that anyone can't amaze you, right? Because we all know something that, even the least, educated person always knows something more than the most educated person, right? And, there is a difference between knowledge, learning, understanding, studying, reading, wisdom, intelligence. It's very complex. But let's be honest about this. There are hierarchies that are being built for a reason, because this reason is that they work, actually. And we should be, at least listening to them first. And this is essentially what I do before I make a video. And sometimes I say it, I'm lazy, right? Especially when I get to the manualistic video, I say, oh, well, this is easy because, this is stuff I studied since, the first year of university. I know the essentials. I know what the set of thoughts, of opinions that I can put out, and I fundamentally I don't have to prepare more than much, right? Then there is the bit more the advanced stuff that requires a bit more of understanding, a bit more following, a bit more of researching. So most of what I draw information from is actually historiography. Like, it's not the source unless it's a particular type of topic that has to do with, like, if, for example, an ancient battle, usually it's like 2 or 3 sources, right? And those are very easy to read, and they're the best choice if you really want to approach a topic easily. Or already for a medieval battle, you can't do that most of the times, especially if you start being, later on, like in the 13th century onwards, right? The thing starts becoming very, very difficult. This reflects in many ways is even the problems that we have, I think, to communicate stories that go beyond a certain, time and space, historically speaking, because, For example, if I had to talk about modern history or contemporary history, I would start having consistent problems even for the delivering of the information. Like I would have to dumb it down, considering the sheer magnitude of its importance, right? I could, I have my decent, interest in World War II, but I realized that for all the stuff that is out there that I even have, among that mountain of books, there would be so much to say that for me to come on the fore and simply starting to talk about it doesn't sound, very. I wouldn't see the point, like unless it's a very good synthesis from, a very quoted historiographical, from an author, right? But at that point, I would even have to follow someone else's steps, and the whole thing is it's less easy than it seems. It's definitely more complicated and somewhat. This is a problem we have properly in historiography ourselves. I have my modernistic and contemporaneistic colleagues that do reflect actually a lot, and they're really right in doing so. We're saying, but will we be ever able to do things like a history of the 20th century? Because objectively, like it's not that a single historian can write fully in a competent way about such an enormous amount of historical data and pretending to have a point at the end. It's such a complicated system that it's utterly embarrassing to frame, and the difficulty is present in ancient and medieval history as well. So what I do is, first of all, relying kind of on the better books to even starting recognizing the authors, recognizing the narrative. I mostly use disclosuring books, so not the ones that really go too deep into the matter, because those ones are either outdated at that point. Like we don't make historiography like that anymore today. Like the big capital works books have been stopped to be written like in the 50s, in the 60s. Like after that point, it's always been like a kind of a mumbling over the same stuff as a base, like, and then the expansion in other brooklets and branches that are even a bit too specific for the like. Of course, historiographical perspectives changed over the greater works, but it's ever more difficult to bring on the fore a work that recollects that, and it's easy to access. So actually, I'm working on books that have already made a synthesis of the best historiography, and that you can hear and listen to. Like, now it's useless to make specific examples, but let's say where you can recognize the quality when you see it. And I don't think it's that easy, right? In the sense that once again, it's not enough just to read a title, to read a name, and say, okay, wow, this is the certification, whatever is written in here is good. Like tomorrow, hopefully, we will be talking about a topic that is very controversial still, because there are lots of people still reason the old way. Instead, the most updated historiography started saying something different, and this happens even more often than we can imagine. But it's a topic, for example, in here that has a lot of, even cultural impact. That's a problem that I have when I make videos. That is to say, can I really talk about this topic in all the dimension that I want, right? And without getting, uselessly biased or whatever. That's why I also perhaps I'm also rewarded a bit by my followers in that regard, because probably you realize that what I do, I try to do it without much of a second A, right? There are lots of topics that probably I discuss, probably attract even people that presume that my channel is either from one side or the other of the political aisle, for example. Whereas I personally don't give a damn. I mean, I can have my own. Of course, I have my balance in that regard, but I don't try to enforce my own view, to express it even at the point you can say, but what do I care about it really? And why do you really think about it? And that's where the thing would get interesting, because that's where the passion would bring, even to say, okay, look, I think this because I'm also motivated by these factors. But that's also where the path becomes too complicated to make me believe that it really, my views are subjective, beliefs are even important in this regard. And that's, I think, a healthy way of reasoning, because we all have this degree of subjectivity, but we should recognize at some point that it doesn't quite matter, right? It may matter for us, but for our ends, maybe it's not even really helpful. And that what we should be doing should be even to confine that to where it presumably belongs, or should be relegated in, and try to be ever more objective, right? This is what I try to do. That's why I try to just give information, and to do it mostly on the historiographical base. The books I use are fundamentally updated to the very last years most of the times. Right, it depends on the topics, of course. It depends even on the generality overall of the question. Like, it's more likely that I use less updated information when the topic is more general. This is paradoxical, but it works not much for a reason of time of publishing, but exactly because the more general you get, and the less it's plausible that you're actually updated about all the stuff you're talking about. So there is a bit of resistance in that regard, and this is what happens, in fact, at popular culture as well, because, as we were saying before, there are no true boundaries between what is like the academy and the masses, right? Everything influences each other in this regard. When do I use sources? Well, when I try to get a bit more, of course, into the technicalities of the information I get, right? This depends mostly on those, relates mostly to those topics I would like to be more spot on. Like, if I talk about tactics, that is mostly what I study also in my, true, historical activity. I try to go there to reason on the terms that are used, to how, what they mean in the original language, what kind of, of depth they have, what they really mean, if I have encountered them somewhere else, if I can reconnect it to others. So I can say that I'm chained mostly to actual and legitimate historical information. So the way I present it may change something, and especially, once again, in the more general sense. I have my own interpretations and narratives of history as well. I recently, in the last years, probably came out more, especially looking at this more general and compared perspective, in, mostly medieval history of Europe, Mediterranean, that there is like a core in every civilization that is the majority chunk, the orthodox one, and that has certain beliefs, that are certain regulatory and kind of rationalistic approach to reality, and then there is a fringe that is more eclectic, that is more idealistic, and is more violent even at the same time. And that this, for example, is unavoidable, and that is actually part of a broader mechanism of continuous shaping of civilizations, that brings to the improvement of it in the process as well, that is meant to readapt, is meant to say, okay, that there's never like a single truth, a single belief, a single thought, but there's always someone complaining. They may be wrong, but they may even question about things that can be useful for the central core of the people in this regard. So there are other interesting things that came since the beginning. I always complain about the modernistic and technologistic prejudices, for example. This is something that I've overly explained, and I found a lot of confirmation in, especially with the von Clausewitz series, right? Von Clausewitz series nobody watches. I realize it, unfortunately, at this point, but I will go on with that. Technically, I should finish it in like another more than 1 year still. But that's, for example, a very important feat. And you should, like, if you're really interested in the topics you watch regularly on this channel, you should be interested in that as well, because it really has a point that helps dramatically in building a true historical awareness in the properly scientific sense of the world. That is, try to look at what we're talking about in the first place. What is that we're talking about in the first place? This is a question that you rarely find out there. As I was saying before, most talkers out there just tell the tale, tell the story, and they don't care to after all question themselves, because it seems for them to be a great deal already the fact of having gathered the historical information. And that's not a very healthy way of making history, because the first thing should be, why am I doing this in the first place? Why am I deciding to talk about it? And why, how could this be useful? What is that I could improve? What could make this truly unique and precious in this regard for someone? Right, and precious even in an economical gain from my side, not just in a monetary sense, but more broadly. And the question seems to me that that's exactly where I think Schwerpunkt stands mostly in, as a not necessarily as an exception, but definitely as in a way that doesn't seem to me to be restrained by much other contingencies that you find elsewhere, right? There are people legitimately want to make money on YouTube. There are others that want to make political propaganda. There are others that and are faking in this regard, even just for the contents they put out there. There is who just wants to vent or to show off and whatever. When I talk about this stuff, I think that ideally, at least, that this content may fall on someone's ears who are ready to to create something out of it on their own, right? This is the interesting aspect of the story. I'm not here to entertain anyone. I'm not here to lecture anyone, or even to trying to persuade someone about something. That my contents are fundamentally, as I was saying before, assertive. Like, I say this because I think that, right? And then you have to cope with that. And I think it's an ethical way of putting the question, because I'm not trying you to buy my version of the story, but I'm trying to back it with with data, and to simply naturally state something that I don't even question myself in that regard while explaining it, because that would be a waste of time. But that I also express doubts every once in a while that this is, maybe this aspect should be better, addressed, or maybe we should check this other, and we will see. And it normally happens, and this builds on together, all these patterns, a building that assumes now a shape that is like a pattern interpretation for, like, properly for an historical interpretation. And that's what I care about. I care about not that you know something more or less in terms of, who did what at which time in which place necessarily, which is already a big deal, because also the world needs to even know what it is actually about. That's another aspect maybe it's interesting to have it pointed out. I will try to explain. But first and foremost, to understand why is this important? Right? Why is that we should wrap our mind around it to gain a benefit from it? And this is, I assume, what most people don't really get about history, that there is a true, concrete, beneficial effect from learning it, right? And this goes along with different attitudes that even say, okay, well, humanities are not important, or just maybe because you saw in television that now the universities are overrun by extremists, and it's true in many ways that this happens, and therefore there is a more legitimate, conservative attitude that is, okay, let's make all of this about science and economics, and let's throw away things like history, because anyway, who cares? I don't see even, I must say, I watch legitimately my own share of political commentaries in a very here I mostly tend to like the assertive side of the art, and not much the criticizing, the raging, the bloody, the biting one. And it's obvious that you understand where I come from in this regard. That I'm definitely not buying much of the extremism of today's debates, but I think that even in fact in the environment, in the background I stem from, there is a somewhat superficial approach of history. Like in the reality I've lived in let's say in Western Europe, as you know, being born in the 90s and having watched the world changing a little bit at this point. I came from a past generation of my parents, or even before that, where knowing history was actually a privilege of the rich, of the educated, of the wealthy, the people who fare well, right? And it's kind of disturbing to me that now history seems to be the topic of the loser, of the one that, for example, earns a few, or or has it easy because history is for stupid people that do not want to study maths. Do not study history if you dislike maths, because it's useless. And history is a lot of science as well, by the way. So I'm not buying the other topics as well. Like, I'm not making the soft point of the humanities of just being free and spacing with the mind. No, I believe the humanities actually give you a freaking slapping and violent structure that will crush whatever you actually think, idealistically speaking, of life about. This is where I think history can really help an enormous deal, civilization in this regard. And that's why I often, use this word recently. I throw that around often, like talking about properly what civilization is, and starting making a difference that is really driving away from relativism and saying, civilization is theft, or genocide, or it's must be destroyed, or something like that. History, if you actually know something about it, crushes you in the very opposite way, because it shows you that civilization divorces everybody and brings to actually a positive effect to itself and to the people who remain. So it's an enormous deal, and that's why I study military history as well, because I actually think that even under having a strategic culture, a strategic education is what we actually lack in this world, right? In the world I've been raised in, most of the war was demonized. Like, war was saying, like, if you make war, it's just because you're from one political side of the aisle, not because war is a human thing. It actually everybody does, and it must be understood to, hopefully not to make it, but also to make it when it's necessary. For example, for a good reason, as a tool, as an instrument, right? So. As I often say, if you pretend to just study, and this is valid for the Clausewitzian playlist that nobody watches, and that's why it's important, if you pretend that you can frame this world just by studying politics and society without war, just know that it's like studying this world, with politics and war and society. It doesn't work. Like, you need all three of them. This is the Clausewitzian trinity, and there is a pretty solid reason for wanting that. So that's in case you wonder why I also make that video, and I make that series, and why I think it's actually so damn important, and that why it should be watched. But that's where I get a bit the onion of the story from here, because I realized that most of my videos are watched because of kind of identity reasons. Like, why do you think that all these peoples, all of these, countries that I talk about are, drawing so much attention? Because of course there is much of that as well, in a way that may even be positive, because, I like myself those topics because I presume that they belong to me in a way. As a human being, but also more specifically, from the places I come from, and that I appreciate in its good side. So I That's where we have many problems in here, because most people do not go beyond saying, okay, that's my team, that's my my flag, and that's all I should think about. That's all what I should set my horizons on. Most people, unfortunately, so like when we're thinking to talk about of creating a cohesive politically functional future, etc. How can you cope with hundreds of millions of people who are dramatically underschooled, right? Even in Europe, right? There's not actually there's not even a single country in the world where people are satisfactorily educated in these topics on average of the population, not even by the slightest, right? It's that the Western world is objectively by standards, it's just the highest, it's best one. But it doesn't. It's a relative thing. In absolute terms, education sucks, right? Like it sucks everywhere else, but it shouldn't sucks, right? And that there are huge issues related to that, because we will pay. We're paying actually already for this since a long time, but the major effects will arrive massively at some point, because simply there is a disconnection between the pace with which the world changes and the educational structures that people have now, and nobody's having a true discourse on that. Like the only people who talk about this are idiots who talk about canceling homeworks, or learning things by heart is not important, or that dates or names are not important, right? You need those as hell, actually, next to lots of other things, no doubt. But here there is just like a sterilist contrarian view of saying, let's just change so it's better. No, changing and changing for the better are two very different things, right? There are things that actually work pretty well in the world that we have, and the reason why people want to change it is simply they're too ignorant to have any competence to decide whether it should be changed or not. And the problem is their ignorance. I mean, the fact that we have failed in educating them. And here we're talking about levels that, even it's really serious. Like, it's not just not having a secondary education, which is another, it's literally the school. Like, schools suck. Many countries, even in Europe, do not actually give any freaking damn of true education to children. They don't even know what it is. They just park them there to make them do stupid stuff. It's not a serious thing anymore, right? In many ways it was I don't say it's necessarily worse than before, because I don't believe that. I don't think it's a healthy approach to the problem, for the sake of solving it anyway. But still, things change in a way we should recognize their mechanisms, their elementary mechanisms, and nobody seems to be open to that anymore. So it's evident that when I make videos and I start telling this stuff, and I'm pretty, I become pretty antipathetic to many, because people say, but who is this guy with a broken English is presuming to talk about all this stuff, to making 700 videos at this point of history every day, and talking about this and that, and what the hell does he think? He's probably crazy, right? He probably is incompetent, just wants to emerge and to exhibit and all this stuff, and it's easy to exchange Schwerpunkt for this. So it's not about me, it's about the channel proper and its mission. And that's why every once in a while, aside from my laziness, I make videos like this to just make you aware about what this actually is, right? Why this is not about making a video that suits the average person's expectations of of entertainment, right? Or consumability. This has literally nothing to do with that, right? Sometimes I find embarrassing how ungrateful people are becoming in general, for people to even think for literally for free, and that even start presuming, like they start having the arrogance of presuming that like others should essentially be doing what they think they should be doing, without even understanding what that person is actually doing, as a matter of fact. And this is a problem for everybody. Like, it's, can easily be turned against myself at this point. Many things I've said in this video, but you understand that actually my standards are much more individualistic or libertarian in this regard. We should be able to have a discourse that is open to everything, that however is able to establish a hierarchy of things that really matter and things that actually don't, right? And this naturally is a problem again, because it entails who is that decides it, right? And this question is not easy to answer, because that means to once again in part intervene on certain dynamics, but many do, right? Many do, and once again, it's complicated, too complicated actually for the sake of Schwerpunkt himself. The general, reliability of my contents could be questioned when I start talking about things that are very wide in terms of interpretations, in terms of macro dynamics, things that are very difficult to actually explain with a single or even just a few factors. And we're talking about many of them, right? It's not easy to interpret the major, economical or social trends, for example, of an entire era, or starting to judge even historical figures. So simply because you can be sure that there is always someone out there who's written dramatically more about it, and that I'm likely to be wrong. But at that point, if I arrive to that, at least, it's because I have set some basis that I communicated to you. And naturally, another aspect of this is that sometimes I repeat myself. Other times assume that what I've said in other videos is what you should have, gathered, or that you should go look at if you wonder what I'm talking about in the first place, which is another difficult thing to make people understand. Just know, for example, that there are playlists out there. Like if you're interested in topics, there's not just scattered videos around. There's a whole channel to browse to find lots of stuff, that probably not sometimes even nobody has ever done anything on YouTube or even the internet. These topics that I find to be interesting and somewhat researched are, to complete properly the points I make, right? And even if it doesn't happen, so it's not really an aim. I do it because it happens that they come to build this perspective overall, right, by themselves. So there are always answers. There's always probably something that I speak of in these videos that you may actually go look simply at another video and getting from, especially at this point, and simply making your opinion on how accurate it is. Then of course most of what I talk about is like a we can't say a historical fact per se, because that's debatable what's a historical fact or not, but at least it's something you can check out pretty clearly out there, right? It's not that I'm inventing things. It happens, frankly, that there are certain topics that I've discussed that are not even present out there on the internet, which is dramatic because you don't have this checking, capability unless you have the books from which I learned stuff from, some that are related to them. But there are not many, right? And in general, I always, every time I present a historical content, I contextualize it, right? So I don't start, talking about stuff out of the blue without having presented it. And that's also why I make these introductions to video to single topics may even last 1 hour, because I really care about making you understand where do I come from with that, and where do I go to with that, and why this thing matters, and should it's worth to reflect on. I don't know how at a first impact my channels can sound biased, propagandistic, conspiratorial at a first sight. If honestly, I know maybe I'm not the person who should express this, because I'm the one who makes the videos, but I personally see my contents as far as I can think from a properly from all these perspectives, like from a propagandistic or a ideological or conspiratorial point of view. It happened to me that I was accused of this stuff very rarely, and I'm extremely satisfied about the incidence of this that is extremely low, statistically speaking. And this reveals to me that people generally don't have a problem with my contents unless they, I don't know, they don't like me just at the first sight, or my voice, or whatever I talk about for some other reason, right? But that, at least when I talk about history, I do it in a way that is aimed at getting to a historical assessment that is checkable, right? It is out there, is shared by other scholars, so that I'm not making an alternative point from. The problem at that point, though, is that exactly for the problem of accessibility, many people may not know that something I state is maybe the new historiographical assumption that there is, for example, an important part of history to, if not to rewrite, but at least to reconsider, at least from different perspectives, and sometimes to rewrite literally. I mean, there are very important issues, especially about the even ancient world. I mean, certain assumptions we gave for granted since 2 or 3 centuries from this point that are still repeated over and over again, and that now historiography has perfectly debunked and proposed another valid alternative to. But hey, as we have seen, there is a resistance at the generalized level of education and the information that is very, very hard to die. So probably this was the most important point of the video, in the sense that there is a lot of propaganda and ideology out there today at lots of levels, and it's very easy to mistake a content for something that is not, especially if we very so filled with information, like speaking for 2 hours about something. And it's true that I express my impressions. Sometimes I'm even cryptic. Like I every once in a while stop by saying, oh well, okay, why should I have talked about this, but you do it another time, right? And that will likely happen. Like if I continue to make videos, I will cover that, and it has happened actually many times to have covered points that we should have made, we hinted at some point, and then we came back afterwards. So I don't really think that my videos are controversial, but sometimes I think that there is a general trend of iconoclasm today, that is to say, whatever thing you say in a way that I don't like, I should, censor you, or, portray you in a way that you're really not. Once again, this has happened extremely rarely, and I've seen, this and actually happened only once, and badly, or maybe more than once, but without some were just plain misunderstandings, like the person had never even watched the things I've done, and it was just an impression from moody people. Another time specifically, it was targeted, very briefly even, but never. It was denounced in a way in front of a group for having posted something that actually without sources, without they told me you are kind of, they wanted to portray me like as a white supremacist or something like that. And it would be one of my historian videos I actually talked about that. That was a disturbing experience, right? Not much because of the thing in itself, because I've never taken down content, so everything I said, it's still out there, even in the first videos that sucked in a way, just in the way I spoke, and were kind of lame in many ways. But if you want to pick something I said, like you can't go there and show me the evidence, like accusing me of stuff without even bringing the evidence. Without it's kind of very serious, like but it was all built very vaguely on purpose to create an ideological distortion on the whole story. But what actually, and I'm kind of used to not used actually. The experience wasn't pleasant, but it was like I didn't. It's not that I give a damn about it. What I was actually disturbed by the most on that occasion was actually the reaction of the people who wanted to defend me, because what happened is that I was actually backed by and supported by people who were actually much close to in appearance to the same type of ideologies that was being accused of, and that's bad, right? Because there is actually a sort of brutal war from both sides in these times, and I guess I was like the scapegoat that ended up in the middle on that occasion by chance. But what makes me suffer is, in a broader cultural perspective, how poorly defended we are by by ideologies. Like, how much did the common person, the common person actually buys into ideologism to counter other ideologism. And that sucks because, once again, I think I come from a background that was essentially based on rationality, on democracy, on evidence, on rights, on a civil approach to reality that all overlapped and formed a pretty tight and sound system aimed at assessing objectively what the matter is and resolving it in a functional sense. That is being supplanted, that is crumbling, like literally in the last decades, to a subtle form of ideologism, because we can't say that like 30 years ago people were necessarily more, they were better, that they actually were more educated in an absolute sense, or they, but there was a practical orientation. Like, when people spoke, that there was a sort of dialogue after all. There was a sort of, you're from that side, I'm from that side, we know what we are about, and we are maybe enemies, but we understand this is the game. And that was fierce, and I want to romanticize it. Think about the Cold War, think about dramatic problems that now we can, in fact, we have softened up, after that side was over, and we have, started to pretend that problems that happen today are fundamentally more important than those that existed before, and starting to make a fuss about things without even, using things like evidence, like, proofs, like rationality, like logic, because seemingly either we are bored or there are actual problems, because they of course exist, but people do not seem to have the tools to protest, but they don't seem to have the intelligence to do it. And once again, this has always been a big deal. Look at what's happening today. It was the same in 1968. And we all know what, the damages that this brought on the long run, like how much has not been cured yet, right? How ideologism has taken over the instances of the people who have essentially failed because they were too stupid to understand how to actually solve the problem. And it all goes like at once, like that. And that's where we have problems with these issues today, because we haven't resolved the ones in the past where we actually had the means to resolve them. Now, this is a digression, maybe it's not really necessary, but this is also for making you understand that we don't have to give for granted people who make history. This is another point I was thinking about today or yesterday. We don't have to take for granted that there is always going to be someone who is going to tell us the story in a truly historical sense. Right? This is already starting to happen. There are already major, historical figures that are buying into ideologism, essentially distorting history, like not changing the perspective of the story, like literally distorting the historical process, and very often even omitting sources or trying to, or misreading them, or essentially failing where our historiography has already told so much, and restricting, narrowing down on a level that is simpler because dumber people can buy it more easily. That is an enormous issue. An enormous issue because that hits the very heart of our educational institutions. It's not really a problem of ideologism per se. It's a problem of competence, right? And it stems from deeply unsolved problems that have developed for many people's faults. Like, it's not just a single political side or the one cultural direction. It's really a sum of factors where, of course, there is a balance that lays, more or less from one side or another, but that, that has not been fully addressed yet. And the fascinating aspect of it is that it seems to me that, the best levels of actual historical accuracy or incompetence are, would be capable, at least instrumentally speaking, to solve these problems, right? One part is that sometimes they are ideologized themselves, and that has to do also what is, who actually advocates and for what reasons, and how much is, for example, personal interest involved in forms of, that interfere with historical, with the professional deontology of a historian, which unfortunately is plenty of, and it's no surprise that it's happening in certain areas of the world at this very point, right? Both in North America and in Europe, in certain specific realities of these continents. And just to tell you one of my secrets, I think there is actually a lot to benefit from these dynamics in a hopefully positive direction for society. I mean, exposing these dynamics is going to pay off, in my opinion, because I don't think that, and this is a historical assumption that I made. So I bet on my own, competence on this regard, that there is a side that is going to lose at some point, right? That there is at least a certain method of that is sometimes even just dialectical, that will be exposed at some point, that it will be hopefully rejected, if not permanently, because it's not the case, but at least in a way it can decrease in importance and be confined in the realms of its own of its own mediocrity. But aside from this, I don't know if I answered actually the question I posed, but I assume that at least we can talk more, freely also about history on the base of these issues. Like, if you know what I do this for, if I presume you can see more limpidly through my properly historical themed videos, right? And that's, after all, what probably some of you may be interested in, to really understand that history is a matter, like, it's up to everybody. Like, it's not about me because I'm in this role, it's not about a professor because in his role or whatever, but it's really because we can change this in a way that if we really understand the benefit we can get from it, it will become a practical reality. I dream of a world where history becomes a tool that is not to be discussed to become, let's say, to be directed from the above, but properly for purposes that are not properly historical, but that will spread as a common activity, like that, from which people can extrapolate what they need to live in this life. Like, not properly in a directly derived function. Like, history doesn't give you all the explanations you need, but it kind of gives you certain patterns of interpretation that will never overlap with the current reality, the new reality, or and what will pass eventually over time, but that at least will manage to make you see what's the most likely direction, not taking clamorous wrong turns, just because there is an objective problem that is important, like it can be poverty, margination, injustice, and not finding the wrong solution for that, the one that actually brings nowhere, causes just damage, and doesn't even addresses the problem for what it really is, right? And always beware of mono factorial interpretations of history, because those are not history by definition. Just a lazy, cowardly way of pretending to explain things you don't understand, and radicalize others for your own personal interest, and that's all it is. Anyhow, well, this got kind of heavy towards the end, but I hope you appreciate my explanations, my opening, as my, I'm officially an introverted person. That's the Navy that told me that. If the military spoke, I making a military history channel, I should listen to part of it. But whatever. I will talk about that experience one day, I promise. But that's another story. Anyhow, I will, well, as always, I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it, otherwise leave a like, or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming contents. And for now, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time, and see you next time. Bye.